Joining our conversation, Democratic Congressman Richie Torres of New York. He, along with fellow New York Congressman Dan Goldman, filed an official House ethics complaint against George Santos back in January. I remember the day that the video broke of you and Congressman Goldman dropping it off in his office. Your reaction to today's 13 charges from DOJ?
Well, more shocking than the 13 charges is George Santos' reaction. I mean, he has delusions of grandeur that staggers the mind. I mean, Mr. Santos has the chutzpah to claim that he's the victim of the witch hunt. Never mind that he stole and defrauded and lied and laundered money. You know, it's so obvious that he has a shamelessness matched only by Donald Trump. And for me, fraudulent figures like Donald Trump and George Santos are symptoms of a diseased Republican Party that has become a safe haven for clowns and crooks and charlatans and conspiratorial crackpots. It's a real indictment of how far we have fallen as a country.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is the more chilling part of the story, right? That the contagion of Trump's animosity toward the rule of law in America has spread to New York, to George Santos. I wonder if you think that Elise Stefanik and Kevin McCarthy are to blame for that.
Well, House Republican leadership has a clear choice, right? Either expel George Santos or become his enabler, right? There are only two morally acceptable outcomes. Either George Santos resigns or Republicans expel him. And the refusal to expel George Santos is clearly driven not by principle, but by power and politics. The worst kept secret in Washington, D.C. is that House Republican leadership needs George Santos.
Right.
Kevin McCarthy needs every vote he can get, and he needs George Santos. And notice that Mr. Santos was the decisive vote on the bill to default on America.
Right. I mean, it is this sort of toxic and dysfunctional codependence between Kevin McCarthy and George Santos. And I wonder if you can speak more to the success that you and your colleagues have had in raising this issue of I mean, it's much more than a lack of ethics. It's flagrant criminal conduct. And to see a couple of the crimes charged, there were so many, but a couple of them were squarely in this category of lying and therefore damaging, lying to and lying on his background forms in the House of Representatives. It feels like that shouldn't be a partisan reaction to the sanctity and importance of truthfully filling out background forms and disclosures.
Look, my colleague Dan Goldman and I certainly played a role in shining a spotlight on the corruption of George Santos, but the person who deserves the most credit is Mr. Santos himself. I mean, when you pretend to be a gay, biracial, Ukrainian, Belgian, Brazilian, Jewish, Broadway producer and Wall Street banker, you're bound to attract scrutiny. And so, you know, for me, the life story of George Santos is the greatest fiction in the history of congressional politics. And he's a deep rot at the core of Congress as an institution. You know, in a country of 330 million people, only 535 get the honor of serving in Congress. One of them should not be George Santos. It's an embarrassment to this country that he's a member of Congress. And one of our responsibilities is oversight. We oversee programs like the unemployment insurance program, which he personally defrauded. Like, he's playing a role in overseeing programs that he personally defrauded. And the Republican Party has found common cause with George Santos in assaulting the social safety net that he has been attempting to defraud his whole life.
I mean, and to your point about larger implications for the Republican Party, his role in sitting in a body that oversees that program, you could draw a parallel to Marjorie Taylor Greene's role on the Homeland Security Committee when she amplifies and creates content that is mainlined into some of the places where domestic violent extremists go and say they go to get their information or disinformation. What is your sense of what, if anything, can be done to sort of raise the alarms about the threat that Republican members represent to the body itself?
Look, if we were to move to expel George Santos, it would send a powerful message. And I worry that the failure to do so is going to enable Mr. Santos to leverage his congressional seat to potentially negotiate a much more favorable plea bargain, which is a privilege unavailable to 99.9% of criminal defendants in America. So as far as I'm concerned, either you expel George Santos or you're enabling him. The Democrats are prepared to expel him, whereas the Republicans continue to enable him. And I know that there are a number of Republicans who have called upon him to resign, but actions matter more than words. It's not enough to call upon George Santos to resign. You have to vote to expel him.